Hey everyone, Walter Crosby with Helix Sales Development, your host of Sales and Cigars. Um, Got an episode today with a friend of mine. He was one of the guys I called up when I started doing the podcast and say, "Hey man, you got to come on the podcast. You got a business. We could talk stuff, talk about the business, and it'll get me an episode." And I think we both our businesses have both kind of grown and become uh, more clear about who we really want to work with and how we want to work with them, and sort of narrowed that down. So Rick Beer with Business Chiropractics is my guest. So we have a fun conversation about working with entrepreneurs, about using the EOS system, about not using the EOS system, and a little bit about cigars. So go grab a cocktail, grab a cigar, strap in for another fun episode of Sales and Cigars. Thanks. So, Rick, thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule to jump on the podcast with me. Thank you.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
So we did one of these early on in my in the Sales and Cigars repertoire. I think back when I was started this out, and I called all my friends and said, "Hey, I need help getting the podcast going." And you agreed to come on and talk smart. So.
Yeah. I remember having to be convinced, but I did it, yes.
You had to be convinced. And it's funny that some people, I have people that I know a long time that are successful, that that have stuff to say about sales and about running a business and entrepreneurship, and they're afraid to come on because, well, I might say something stupid, right? And I mean, this one guy's name was Greg, and I'm like, Greg, you say something stupid every day, like, what? Why? Like, he goes, yeah, but I don't need to broadcast it, and I'm like, okay, but you don't say anything that's offensive. You don't say anything that's, terrible or demeaning to people. It's just we're just going to talk. So it's funny how they think that they're going on national television or something. It's weird. Which, by the way, this isn't national television or Joe Rogan for that matter. But
Nothing like that?
we are growing. In a couple of weeks, we'll have 100 episodes in the
Fabulous.
world.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Do you know what the average podcast, the number of episodes of the average podcast before it collapses?
I have no idea.
7.
7? And you're pushing
7.
100?
Well, I've got over 100 in the can, but yeah,
Well,
yeah, it's a lot of work. So if you don't have some passion about having conversations with interesting people, I think you burn yourself out. But or you go poor, one or the other. Um, so
yeah, I remember you saying that they took a bite out of the capital structure.
yeah, yeah. Some people might say, like, why are we doing this? But it's starting to generate some interest, and starting to be able to help reach people, and it's actually helping guests too get some exposure. Um, so let's jump in a little bit and talk about your your journey. You were a corporate American guy, corporate America, not Captain America, but corporate America guy, and your journey to go from there to an entrepreneur is interesting. So why don't you kind of share that part of that story?
Well, boy, the vast majority of my experience in the past, I'll say 20 years, 25 years, has been operating companies for entrepreneurs or or family-owned businesses. So it's entrepreneurially managed or family-owned businesses, and that always brings out a lot of interesting stories from. That just brings out a lot of interesting stories about things that happen when you're running a company for somebody else. Where my business chiropractics journey started, building on all that experience, was about 7, maybe 8 years ago. I was working with a turnaround company out of Grand Rapids, and they had a client here in Wixom that needed to have some pretty much on-site management on the turnaround side, and since live in the area, I got the challenge. They turned out they're an EOS company, and so that was my first introduction to EOS. Because of my operating background, I didn't immediately become the integrator because there were a couple of other people within the company that dearly wanted that role. But it fell to me because there was enough work that these other two really had to spend time out with crews, dealing with customers, and general what the company does for work.
And you hadn't had any exposure to EOS or Wickman or any of that stuff before that, right?
No, had not.
Okay.
So
And
it was
sort
an
of made
interesting.
sense to you?
I'm sorry.
It sort of made sense to you?
Initially it was. I wasn't sure why someone needed it. Why do you want to pay that much money to have someone tell you, here are the boxes that you need to put stuff in, and here are tools and toolkit that you can use. And as I got into it, the more it started making more and more sense, because it really created not only a meeting cadence for the operating teams once a week, but it created a cadence or a sensibility for everybody involved in the company. From this happened to be a family-owned business, and the son was running it, and the father was, 5 or 6 steps back. He was not a helicopter. But everybody through the EOS system actually got to see or have an understanding what their roles were, how they fit in, what they could do, what was helpful to the business. The integrator function fell to me just because, like I said before, of my operating background. But what I found, and before I go there, what I found interesting was that you can run L10 meetings all day and all night, and you can run them within the parameters, and you can follow the structure and all that good stuff. And I know that those who are involved with EOS that are listening to this and have been through it for a while will go, well, yeah, of course. But the way this entity was operated, it was really, let's discuss our goals, let's discuss our, what the issues are, let's discuss solutions. And it in my mind, it got to the point where we were doing the same thing over and over again. So what I ended up doing, and this was an aha moment for a newbie like me with EOS, but certainly not for those who've been involved, was I tracked down who was responsible for the metrics that were in the, in the action items, where the data came from, and made sure that all of that was to me by Friday before. We had meetings on Tuesday, so I wanted everything by Friday night so I could put it together and publish it on Monday. So when we got to our meeting, everybody who was, it turned out it was a phone call. Everybody who was on the call would know what it was that was going on in their division or their group. And and spectacularly, within 3 or 4 weeks, everybody started to, I'll say, play nice in the sandbox. They knew what the other entities' issues were. I should have said there were 3 divisions or 3 groups for this. They were in 3 different cities. So we were doing virtual before virtual was, a something. And once we started publishing the metrics and distributing them so everybody had a chance to review them and think about comments, the meetings became a little bit shorter, 10 minutes shorter maybe, and there was much more participation in a positive way between the people in each of the different cities, because they all had different customer bases, they all had different issues to deal with, a little different climate, so forth and so on, but now they could see what the problems were for somebody else, and it was truly remarkable. Instead of people pointing fingers and complaining, they'd say, you know how we solved that in Cleveland?
Mm-hmm.
Here's what we did. I don't know if it'll work in Detroit, but
So that with some, not necessarily transparency, but just actually sharing of information, that sort of gestalt kind of
yeah,
environment comes out and say, hey, I don't know if it'll work, but we did this, and there might be a kernel in there for you to use, that people become more effective and the meetings become more productive.
Right.
Is what I've seen with L10s. If everybody understands, if everybody has updated their scorecard, so to speak, right, and the metrics are there, then you can actually hone in on the issues and then identify those and solve for them, right? IDS those, and make progress. And to me, an effective meeting is you solve some kind of issue or
Right.
multiple issues.
Right.
And sometimes it's sharing of information, but then there's usually something that needs to be done with that information. Otherwise, why have the meeting?
Right. Well, it to me it got down to the point where it caused the entrepreneur, the son who was leading the company, to think in terms of what the outputs were, what the outcomes were. It wasn't so much. You're absolutely right. It wasn't about transparency. This was not because the way the family ran it. Everybody knew almost everything about the business, except they didn't know all the intimate details of the financial statement, but
Sure.
they knew a lot about the financials. They knew a lot about the operation of the company. So it wasn't so much an issue of transparency, but it really was an issue of having information available. I've read your 7 critical mistakes CEOs make with their sales organizations, and
Thank you.
to some of the, which is by the way a fabulous book.
Thanks.
Easy to read even for a guy like me, And
Well, you're a fellow Michigan grad, so you
yeah, don't hold that. That didn't hold me back.
our vocabulary is similar.
Yeah, but what all of this ended up doing was, even with the owners, was giving them an understanding of how important it was for them to let everybody in the company know what they expected. And it wasn't just you're bad, you're good, but it was here is, we want accounts receivable, we want to work our way to have accounts receivable so that everything's within 30 days. Something mundane, but incredibly valuable.
Well,
And
it to me the L10s, if they're run effectively, you're setting expectations, and those expectations then are, it's the beginning of the quarter and we got to get to this goal, and everybody's trying to help the individual get to their goal, whether that's talking things through or supporting their initiative, whatever their rock is.
right,
Those are that's what comes out of this. I think the only time I've seen that fail is when the individual throws up their hands or begins to demonstrate incompetency in the role, and then there's a level of frustration that the integrator needs to step in and
yeah, it's
take,
right butts, right seats, and you're right. I mean, and this happened in this organization where within 3 or 4 weeks after publishing the data, as here's what you've been doing to on the goals. You've been achieving them. You're moving your way in. Once we got to that point where there were 3 or 4 weeks and people could see a trend line, that you got that you could start to sense who was not going to make it. What
you had momentum or you didn't.
Yeah, and in one case, if I remember correctly, we were able to move somebody to another, I'll say, less demanding position, where they were more support than they were frontline, and that worked out. But we ended up, having to move 2 people out, and and the organization worked really well without them. I mean, it was just when you don't have to make up for other people, it's amazing how more smoothly the thing can run.
Yeah, accountability is part of the outcome
Mm-hmm.
of running EOS and L10s. I mean, you can get there without it, some people want a structure to follow, and they can point to the structure as this is how we do it. But it's really, it's a simple, here's the expectation, here's the progress milestones we need to follow to get there. And when we get stuck, it's up to the individual to raise their hand. And it's not a problem that they get stuck. I think in a good culture, it's not the problem that they raise their hand. The problem is that they don't raise their hand and they try to hide it. And, I think that, at Ford, when, his name's, I'm drawing a blank on his name, the guy who fixed Ford the second time.
Mullally?
Mullally, yeah. Where he tried to get his people to come in and say that they were behind, or they were stuck, or that things weren't happening. And he didn't care if it was red or yellow or green, he just wanted the truth.
Right.
And that took a long time because of the culture to get to that.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to say I'm stuck. And Mark Fields was the first one to raise his hand and say, I got red here, in this metric. And he didn't get mad, he didn't get upset, he was pleased and happy, and that somebody finally had broken through. That culture, the Ford culture, would eat that for breakfast once Alan was gone. But
Yeah. Right.
it's setting those expectations and saying, hey, you're going to struggle. It's going to happen. So let's just be open and honest about it. And then, as a team, we help each other out and figure it out. And then it becomes clear who's pulling their weight, who isn't, who's participating, who's trying to be helpful, and who isn't. And you can start to separate and make those hard decisions. Because that is part of it. I mean, if you aren't in the right seat, then you need to be moved to a good seat, and that might be outside the company.
Right.
And I think there's leaders in businesses, from what I see, fail to create that culture of accountability. And once you start to accept mediocrity, there's the people that are performing become
Complacent.
frustrated.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, eventually they'll come complacent, but the first thing they get is frustration and anger. Like, why am I busting my ass if Bob over there is able to coast, or worse?
Right.
I see that in sales all the time. I think it's easier to hide in other areas of a company, maybe not finance, but 'cause if you're not balancing the books, then we probably got pretty clear problems.
It's yeah, it's right there in front of everybody.
So talk to me about how you go from that kind of understanding to becoming entrepreneurial for yourself, and just saying, I can go do this for other leaders who are struggling, with
Well,
putting their arms around these numbers.
I think in my case, what really made it come around for me was just seeing how quickly, things that I had employed before, not knowing about EOS, but just that were logical, having information available for people, trying to build as large a hand-raising culture as possible in the companies that I was involved in, and so that we could all find out who needed support, where there was a potential breach. I mean, all the stuff that you find out when talented people will raise their hand and tell you, I'm having a problem here. When I saw that, and I saw how it was, I want to say accelerated, but that's not totally the right word, how it was, how that culture benefited by having relevant metrics published frequently, not just made available, but published so that everybody read them.
Right.
I saw how quickly people were able to do better. They were able to perform. They felt there was a new sense of confidence because each person had a much better idea what it was that was expected of them, because they could see it reflected every week that what they were doing was having an impact. Now,
So, I mean, I think that, I mean, it goes back to the simple thing that we were talking about, right? Setting the expectations, measuring that, keeping an eye on it,
right,
giving people permission to, I'm stuck.
yeah,
In EOS parlance, I'm stuck. But sometimes it's just like I'm lost here. I need help. I think I need to do this. But having that permission, because it goes expectations, accountability, permission to say I'm struggling, and then getting that help, right? Because if somebody's strong enough to say I'm stuck, then that's a person worth working with and trying to give them the help, because it takes a little courage to sit in a room with other leaders to say I'm stuck.
oh yeah,
And
yeah. And if they are truly stuck and they're, I'm going to overstate this, not incompetent, you've got a real diamond, somebody
Mhm.
that, they're going to be able to have a logical conversation with you about goals, objectives, strategies, things like that that would affect them, and how this can be, how the overall corporate goals can be deployed per group, per activity, per entity. It can be a very powerful tool when somebody will raise their hand.
Absolutely. So talk to me a little bit about, doing this when you're at the company. I mean, you might be a subcontractor 1099, but you're there, right? You're putting
Right,
in the time, in the place, the situation you described. But what business chiropractics does is to do this on a fractional basis,
right.
right? Is one of the ways you serve business leaders and entrepreneurs. So talk to me about how you balance that. I mean, you're looking at the data. The data speaks to you, right? That's obvious.
Right.
But getting the data out, and then being able to give people that comfort and the ability to be clear about that it's okay to say I'm stuck. Is that something that you participate in? Is that something that you enjoy doing? I mean, help me understand that piece of it, because I think there's people out there that are struggling with having that element. They may not be running EOS. They just like are trying to get their arms around these things. How can you help them do that?
Um, well, there are two ways. One way is that, when you're sitting in a meeting, whether it's an L10 or if it's an operating meeting with an agenda that you every week you're working your way through. Um, I get a sense of who wants to say something, but they're not sure that they should.
Hmm.
So what I'll do is, and this is part of my contracted role, if you will, what I'll do is I'll take them aside after the meeting, the old walk down the hallway with them to the water fountain, and ask the question. I'm not going to take five. I'm not going to take 5 hours to ask them a question. I'll just say, okay, it seems like you had something you want to talk about, but you also seem like you weren't sure that you should say something in that group. And then it's really amazing when you get, again, it's a lot of this stuff is communications. When you actually bring up the topic and you tell somebody they were telegraphing that, and it seemed like it was going to be a good comment, and I really wanted to know what it was. How quickly people will start to talk to you and explain, what it was they wanted to bring up. My follow-up question to that is, why weren't you comfortable? Because if you're not comfortable, there's somebody or something that's holding you back.
Right. And then that becomes the piece that you may or may not be able to solve yourself, but you can bring the people into
Yeah, right.
play, right? That might be the CEO, it might be the president, it might be another division head. Like, you guys gotta, figure this out, or you got to give them permission. I think that's a huge benefit in a fractional role of a company, to be able to go in and sit in a room and watch, right? And really watch what's going on, the body language, the dynamics of the people, who's sitting where, all of that, and then be able to give that feedback to the person who's signing your check that like,
Right.
here's what I'm seeing. That's a huge bit of value that is not always made clear on the front end, right? Because you're not really sure. But like that's one of the things that I think as a fractional provider we got to talk about. Like these, I'm going to help you get the numbers. I'm going to help you have that ability to have the right conversations in those meetings. Absolutely. And then we're going to do it this way and this way and this way. But the other thing that I bring to the party is if I'm in those meetings, man, I'm giving you a perspective that you don't normally have. Things that you've become immune to, things that you don't even see anymore, right? Like somebody moved the ottoman in the living room and you trip over it because it's never been there, right?
Right.
The old Dick Van Dyke Show. That's how old I am.
Well,
Although I didn't see those shows when they were on originally, I only saw reruns.
well, I saw them when they were on originally, so go figure, right? No,
Okay.
one of the to interrupt you here, one of the things in this part of the discussion that I've always found fascinating was when I talk to somebody that I have identified as maybe wanting to speak out. One of the things, and this is not one of the things. This is the dominant reason is that they're concerned to be or afraid of saying something because it what they have noticed and what they want to talk about is the company goals don't fit what the company's operation can do. The owners want something to happen that ain't going to happen so fast.
Right.
And
And and
not that it's the wrong thing. It's just the way the company is set up. They're not going to. There's very little way they're going to accomplish that goal, no matter how defined. And,
yeah,
and
the emperor's new clothes, right? Is
yeah,
is a is an element of that. Um, and I think part of the job where I hear things from on a fractional basis from people in an organization, and it's like, well, when you told the boss that, what'd he say? Well, I haven't told him that. Well, because it's not important. No, it's hugely important.
right.
So then why wouldn't you tell him? Well, because he'll get mad. Okay, he'll get mad, but then what, right? Are you able, is that going to solve the problem? Because if it doesn't solve the problem, then you're just spinning your wheels here, right? Wouldn't it be great to get a solution to this so you guys can make progress, right? And or this other person might be wrong because they haven't shared all the information, and then he gets the other piece, and it's like, oh, now I see the whole picture, and then everybody can work. Either way, the situation is improved unless you have a toxic leader who's very proud of his new clothes and doesn't want to make any changes, and then
Right.
that's good information to have too. Then you can move on.
Right. Yeah, it is usually quite fascinating when you get into those circumstances. There's only been one time when I've told the owner that I was working for that, hey, I tell you what, why don't you come in and run the meeting and just let me sit and let me listen, because normally you can pick that up while you're running the agenda because there's enough time where everybody's talking and you can watch the room. But I had a circumstance where I wanted to watch how people reacted to the owner. It wasn't that big of a company, so the owner was essentially the general manager, where the owner would come in, run the meeting, and I was just sort of in the background watching the difference between how people reacted when I was there running the meeting, or when one of the supervisors was running the meeting, and when the general manager owner was there. And it was, it was interesting because there were a lot of people that just stopped talking.
Right. And that's a big problem in many organizations, especially smaller ones. Well, actually, not especially, but it's really impactful when it's at a smaller company where people just shut down. It's all like you said, communication,
Yeah,
right? And understanding, that communication and understanding why people behave in a certain way is what doesn't matter if it's a marriage or business relationship. If you don't effectively communicate your ideas and listen and are able to disagree about things and then explain it, especially in business, right? Because we have to have the talk. Everybody's got to be heard. It's just my philosophy. Everybody's got to be heard. And if you're not willing to stand up and say, this is what I think, then you don't get a right to bitch later, right? Like that's kind of like if you didn't vote,
Yeah.
shut up. I don't really care what you think,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Absolutely.
But so if you're not sharing in a business meeting or a leadership meeting and you're not sharing what it is that is being asked, then it's going to be really hard for them to get on board with whatever decisions made. So to me, that's the leader's job to get everybody's opinion, get it all on the table, hash it out, and then the leader makes a decision, and then everybody has to get on board. And if you're not on board and willing to go carry that flag down the hallway, then you shouldn't be in the room to begin with, because that you have to say your piece and then be part of the team.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
there are decisions that the owner has to make or the leader has to make that not everybody's going to agree with, and
Well,
it's
and
just
that's
the way it is.
and that's let's stick on communications just for a while, because communication is what drives it. I mean, whether it's metrics or whether it is a description of what your job is, and how you're measured against that description. If the people in the company don't, if they don't feel that they can share what they're thinking, that may be another problem. It could be that they don't know enough yet, or they haven't been
Right.
paying attention.
So they have to feel safe to
Yeah.
be able to share their thoughts and have their hand and argue, but they have to be mature enough to be like, oh, didn't know that, still disagree, but right, but to get on the train,
Right.
right, to go along with it. There's so many people I see that just like, no, no, I don't care. Like they're used to getting that participation trophy, right? And they just that
Yeah.
that I think that contributes to like I don't really care what your reason is. I want what I want, and sometimes that is the leadership like not making it safe to have the conversation, and sometimes they want safety to them means I get what I want, and neither one of those are good. You got to get in the middle there and be able to talk it out and have the discussion and agree to disagree. Politically, I always talk about Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, right? Going back into the 80s, they didn't agree on anything except for, well, they agreed on one thing. And this is what they allowed them to do their job, was that they both thought that they had a job to do and this was a great country. Now, the path that they saw to get to that was different, but they sat down every week and had lunch together at the White House, and there was beer involved, right? But they had to figure it out, and they knew that was their job, and they'd yell and scream at each other and do all that stuff, but they had a job to do, and I think that idea has to be, whether it be in a family situation or a business situation or a family business, right? We got to be able to have those types of conversations within the parameters of professionalism and being an adult.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you need to have free swinging conversations, and at the same time, the leader, the owner, the general manager, whoever is ultimately the decision maker in that moment, needs to be able to communicate to everybody that he or she is definitely interested in their opinion, wants to discuss it, but, and I think you put it well a few minutes ago, but a decision will need to be made. The leader will make that decision, considered decision based on everybody's input, and that the expectation is that once this decision is made, the folks on the team are going to work to do whatever that decision is. And
Right.
all too often, I have found leaders leaders are a bit timorous about even talking about that. They don't want that. it appears as though they don't want that responsibility.
Yeah, well, but that I'm sorry, um,
But that's what comes with the role.
tough. Yeah, get out of the role,
Yeah, right.
right? Give up control,
Butts and
or
seats.
or step up and put your big boy or big girl pants on and do it. But
Yeah,
they also have to, like, if you're sitting in a room and say, "Keep Rick, you haven't said much," right? And you're usually pretty, clear with your ideas. It's that leader's job to go around the table and it's like, what are you thinking? What's happening? What's going on in your brain? And they got to pull that out, and because there might be something in there that's going to help everybody understand something significantly. And it might be an operational roadblock that nobody thought about. It might be a sales issue that nobody can execute, whatever it is. But
right.
that leader, tough. You got to be tough. You have to be able to have that. You got to set the expectations. You got to hold people accountable, and you really have to elicit everybody's opinion and give that environment the safety for those conversations. Like, this is a safe zone, right? You can have whatever. You just can't throw stuff at people.
Right.
But in some cases, it's okay to throw stuff at people. I think if
As
you got
long as
to,
you're willing to have it thrown back at you.
right, right.
You
I
know?
mean, it should be a crumbled up piece of paper, not a pen or something. But
Yeah. Right.
but I've been in meetings where somebody, like, threw something across the table, and there was like silence, and I started laughing in the meeting, and the guy that owned the company looked at me and was like, "What are you laughing at?" He goes, "He just threw something at the other," and I'm like, "Yeah, it's funny. It's like these guys are pretending they're adults, and
Right.
we need to grow up and be able to use our words."
Right.
And everybody started laughing except for the guy who threw the thing. And I'm like, "Look, I'm not taking a shot at you. We've all felt like throwing something at him because he's an idiot, right? But you got to be able to work through it." Ultimately, the guy that got the thing thrown at him was taken out of the room, right? He was removed from that meeting because he took taken off the leadership team. Um, it, but that was on the leader for not getting everybody involved, right, and creating that toxicity. So, all right, so you can do the numbers, you can help people with things, but I think a big part of what you offer is to be that vision through a different lens from your experience, and to really help somebody see what's really going on, what they're missing because they have, blind spots.
Right.
And
Right.
and owners all have blind spots, right? We all do, right? We don't really see. My wife points them out to me every once in a while that I have a blind
Every
spot.
once in a while.
Every once in a while. Um, I'm not going to define what once in a while means, but
I had that experience just yesterday.
frequent.
Frequent.
Yeah.
I
And I'm not saying it's undeserved. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, we have to got to be willing to look, hold up that mirror and say, yeah, I'm part of the problem.
Well, it
So,
took me a long time, Walter, but I finally have gotten an appreciation for having her point those things out. Because the sad truth is, she's seen things from a lens and a perspective that I can't.
right.
I'm not over on her side of the room, as an example, right? And almost almost every time in the last year or so, I've been able to benefit from that. Now, from her comments, her observations, whatever tone of voice she uses. But and I strip all that away and I listen to what she's saying, then it is usually something that's very beneficial for me because I just hadn't seen myself in that in that mirror before. Now,
So when this
that's what I'm
drops,
learning. I'm continually learning, which is the fun part of what I do, and that's part of what I'm sharing with people that I work with or work for, is giving them that other perspective. And yeah, I'm careful with how I couch it and present it to them, based depending on who the person is and what kind of attitudes they've distributed or demonstrated previously, but it's actually one of the best parts of what I like most about what I do is to be able talk to people about how they're coming across.
Yeah, and I think it's something that you do well, you recognize it, um, but you probably don't put enough emphasis on that on the front end of an engagement prior to getting hired in. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to be that person that looks at that. And let me tell you, that's going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And, but it will be impactful, right? Because usually on the other side of being uncomfortable is where we really want to go.
Right. Exactly.
We'll just get there faster if
Right.
you're willing to have that conversation. Um, so, so the the website I'm going to have in the show notes, Business Chiropractics with an S. And when somebody goes there, hey, Rick said something smart. I want to go look at it. I'm familiar with the website, so you've got three what you call one pagers
Yeah.
on there. So if I'm an entrepreneur and I've got a company I've got a team. I think I got a good team. I think everybody cares, but we're just missing the mark in a couple of areas. And I think I might need some outside perspective. Which one of those, which one of those one pagers should they start with, in your opinion? That gives them a broad.
Well, the first thing I would do is I would look at the video that's on the very top line of the website, which talks about fractional COO, and how that what the benefits are for a smaller growing organization. And it's like 2 minutes. It's simple. It's easy. It's even humorous. And it gives a really. I've had more people tell me that it gave them and thank you, by the way, for this. It gave them a view of, in 2 minutes, it gave them a really good view of what a fractional does, and especially an operations guy.
And then once they peruse this, your contact info's on there. They should just freaking call you and say, I need 15 to 30 minutes to like
Just,
talk through something.
yeah,
And you're pretty good at telling somebody I can help you or I can't help you, relatively quick, right?
yeah, right. I mean, that's same as being in a room and watching body language, right? You get a pretty good feeling if it's something you can help with or not, or if they're going to be willing to take the help. They may say the words, but there are times when people say the words and don't really care. They want
Yeah.
to make it sound like they're looking for help for
I
whatever.
had a conversation with a guy yesterday who runs a really significant, it's $3 million landscaping company, right?
Yeah.
That cuts grass. They do a little more than that, but, and, we were talking and he's like, well, what do you think you can help me? I was like, I don't think so. I don't think I can help you because I don't think you really want to be helped. I think you want somebody to come in and tell you you're doing what you should be doing, and that doesn't sound like the case, so I don't think I can help. Because I'm not willing to take your money to give you, yeah, this is all good. Because it's not. And
Yeah.
I said, that's probably a lot to swallow, and it's probably something might make you mad. But I think it's something, if you go away and think about it, I'm happy to have another conversation if that resonates. And if you don't, I'm cool with that too. And it did make him mad, but he did agree to go away and think about it. And so I'll see if he calls me back next week.
Well, it is always interesting when you talk to people about that they have issues and what should they do about it, and then they start answering their own questions, and they're usually going down the same old path. They're not going down anywhere new. They point out the problems, and then they tell you why the problems are the problems because they're creating the problems. But
Right.
but you tell them,
And you're not willing to go do something different. So
yeah, and that's just a nightmare.
yeah, and I've gotten. It's different when you're running your business. It takes a minute for you to realize that I can't help that person. you have to just walk away. And I think that's the right thing to do for yourself and for them, if they're not willing to do it, because you're just going to waste everybody's time and resources, and time is our biggest resource.
Right.
So,
You
all
know,
right, so
if I can go back one step back to the question about download, which which of the three pieces should somebody,
mhm,
download and take a look at? Um, if they've got a strong operations person, then I would say look at the managed metrics download, because that now what we can talk about is within the context of having a strong operations management. Now let's make sure that we're getting metrics that aren't just metrics for the sake of operations team saying, look what we're doing, but they're actually moving toward the company goals, either to prove out the goals that they are good goals or to be able to modify the goals. But certainly, let's let everybody know in the operating team what it is that they're doing, how it's contributing, and how it's building. So, but if if the company doesn't have a strong operations manager or director, whatever the title would be, then I think downloading and looking at the fractional COO piece will give them a really good idea, in addition to the video, of what I can do to help them, and determine if maybe they've got somebody lurking in the back corner of their shop that should be more involved in how things are run.
right, and they've just been timid to step up and
Yeah.
grab the bull by the horns. But they can download all three of them. You're not putting
Oh
a
yeah.
governor on them. They can
No,
go look at it
it's
whatever they
wonderful.
want.
Digital wood is wonderful.
Yeah. So let me ask this question. Usually the only question I ask everybody is, past or present, Rick's relationship with cigars.
Well, as you know, I am an occasional cigar smoker. Probably I have in a year what you might have in a weekend. Um, but the last get together we had, I the tobacconist at the place, I just asked him, what would you recommend? I figured, oh well, he's got this huge humidor. He's bound to be able to find. And I told him, here's how often I smoke. Here's here's what I like. And it's not from a aficionado perspective. It's just here's what I like.
What I like, which is what's most important.
And he pulled up this LFD Reserva Especial, which was when he first pulled it up, I'm going, what's little dinky thing with this long pointy end, and I'm going, what? This is cigar, what? And it turned out that it never went out. I could smoke it at whatever pace I wanted to, and it had a really nice smoke to it. So I knew where I was blowing it. Basically, I could blow it up and out of people's faces or down, and you know what I mean. It was just and it was a pleasant flavor. It was all the
It
way
fits
through
your palate.
what?
It fits your palate.
Yeah, I mean all the way through to the end. It never got to the point where it burned anything, and
Well,
I was
that
really
was
I was really pleased.
a top shelf. So to me, you should be able to walk, because we were at. I'll give a couple of plugs here. We were at Brandon Carney's little
Yeah, right.
cigar event, right? And we were at Ambassador Cigars in Troy,
Yep.
and you went into the and I don't know if
Nate
it was Scott or one of the other
was
guys
Nate.
who Nate, okay, and he said, what are you looking for? You described it to me. That's the sign of a really good tobacconist, a cigar guy, whatever. When they can say, you like this, and then he's like, well, you might try this one, and it lines up, right? That's a really good, and they can tell you why without getting into a bunch of detail to make you feel like, oh wow, I don't really know anything about cigars. That's important too, that they read the room. But I think that's a great cigar shop in Michigan. We're both outside of Detroit,
Yeah.
and they've got they've got a great humidor. They've got great food. They got a great bar, really good service there, and it's a good place to go experiment, because they can drive you in the right direction.
Yeah.
And to
Absolutely.
me, that's part of the fun. I went into I was in Orlando for some sales training a couple of weeks ago, and my wife and I had dinner, and I asked the waiter, "Hey, there's a cigar shop around here." And I can't remember which direction. He goes, "Oh, it's right down there, right? It's like a quarter mile." And I'd been to the shop before, and it's weird. It's like the whole place, right? All 15,000 square feet. There's a little bar over here, some tables outside. The rest of the place is all cigars.
Wow.
So I mean, it's like a big grocery store for cigars. So talk about selection, and you're wandering around, and they've got a ton of guys in there that are work there, and I was looking at some cigars, and I was talking to this guy, and he goes, "Have you tried one of ours?" Like, no, I didn't know you had cigars, and they grow their own tobacco in Claremont, Florida, and they roll their own stuff
Really?
right there. Yeah. And I'm like, all right, I'll try it. So I grabbed a couple of those, and I grabbed a couple other cigars I wanted to try. But to me, that's fun. It's
Well,
just a
yeah,
fun experience of,
yeah.
of trying something different. Sometimes it doesn't work out well, but okay. Still had a decent cigar.
Well,
Um,
yeah, that's just it. I mean, I've never had a quote unquote bad cigar, but I've
oh,
had some that I like more than others. But this was the first one where I actually kept the label,
so you can go get another one.
so I can go get another one.
All right. Well, that's good to know. All
Yeah,
right. So businesschiropractics.com, best way to go dig you out. You're also on LinkedIn, but you don't spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, right?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm probably on LinkedIn every day, but I'm not necessarily um,
Kicking
pushing
out
out
content.
content. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm if I've been getting a lot of messages and I've been responding to them in pretty much close to real time. So um, it's been a good it's been a better experience as I get more involved with it.
All right. All right. Well, let's leave it there, man. Appreciate you taking the time again. I think we help entrepreneurs can track you down if they really, need some help in those finding the right numbers. Fractional operations guy, they're just setting up dashboards so that they
Right.
have a way to look at things. So,
Well,
um,
yeah, I'm. We're matter of fact, we're going to start working with somebody where we're not doing anything unique. We're just taking their systems, pulling data from their systems, and putting it into report form that they need to see on a weekly basis.
awesome. All right. And what I was going to tell you before was it was around the 36-minute mark. If you want to go back and have your wife listen to that section where you were
Ah,
very complimentary of her helping you see things that you didn't
I
normally
will. I
see.
will make sure she's well aware.
All right, man. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Walter. Take care.